So this article you sent over on family therapy for addiction, it's pretty fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
Definitely seems like you're digging into some alternatives to the usual approach to treatment.
Yeah, and it's a good thing to explore, you know? People tend to think of addiction as this really isolating thing, but this article, it really digs into how much it impacts, like, the whole family. It's not just about, getting the individual on the right track. It's about, like, mending those relationships, rebuilding that support network.
Totally. And what really caught my eye was the way this article breaks down all the different ways you can approach family therapy. It's not like a one-size-fits-all kind of deal. It's more like, you get a whole menu of options, right? You can find what really clicks for your family.
Exactly. And I think having options is super important in this area because, let's be real, every family dynamic is going to be different, right? So why not offer different approaches? Like one that I thought was super interesting, it's called Behavioral Couples Therapy, BCT for short. It's really about the relationship between, say, two partners where one person's dealing with addiction and the other is, right there with them on their journey to recovery.
Okay, so let's break that down a little bit, this BCT thing. How does that actually look, in practice?
So picture this, right? A recovery contract. Sounds kind of formal, I know, but it can be really powerful. Basically, it's this commitment tool where the person who's, trying to get better, they put it out there, their desire to stay sober, and then their partner, they're pledging their support right there in black and white. This contract lays out like specific ways they can be there, creating a drug-free home, going to therapy sessions together, that sort of thing.
So it's about like really presenting a united front against addiction, yeah.
Yeah.
Using support and accountability
Nice.
as these tools to like boost the chances of recovery.
Exactly. Because the article really emphasized that a strong relationship can be a huge help when it comes to preventing relapse. And it's not just about the contract itself, it's more like BCT also focuses on communication, managing stress, stuff like that, which honestly strengthens any relationship, right?
Yeah, for sure. Now, there was another approach that the article mentioned, multisystemic therapy, or MST. That one seems a lot more like intensive, right?
Yeah, MST, that one's really geared towards like, teenagers, especially those who are dealing with some pretty serious substance use issues. We're talking like legal issues, behavioral problems, the whole nine yards. It's definitely a lot more comprehensive, brings in not just the family, but schools, communities.
Wow, so it's really like looking at the whole picture. Because I guess a teenager's behavior, it's not happening in isolation, right? It's all connected.
Exactly. Their family, school, the whole community, they all play a part. And by tackling all of that together, MST, it tries to create some lasting positive changes.
I got to say, this menu of options is kind of amazing. Now, knowing my thing for like efficient and targeted approaches,
hmm
you mentioned I'd be all over this thing called solution-focused brief therapy. What's the deal with that one?
Well, it's all in the name, right? Solution-focused brief therapy. It's all about getting practical, finding solutions to specific problems the family's facing. It's really helpful for families dealing with like a bunch of complicated stuff all at once because it cuts right to the chase, focuses on goals you can actually achieve.
So instead of like getting stuck in the past,
Yeah.
overanalyzing every little problem, this one's all about, okay, what's the solution? Let's take action.
Exactly. Action-oriented, future-focused, that's solution-focused brief therapy in a nutshell. So instead of spending months, years even, dissecting the past, this approach is all about finding those strengths, those resources families have, and using them to make a plan for a brighter future.
So we've gone over a few different ways to approach family therapy for addiction, each with its own, like, strengths and focuses. But what is it about family therapy in general that makes it so effective? This article you shared, it talks about some pretty unique advantages it has over regular individual therapy. Was there anything that really stood out to you?
The thing that really resonated with me was the impact it has on, like, how well people stick with treatment.
Hmm.
Makes sense, right? Like, if you've got this whole support system cheering you on, holding you accountable, you're way more likely to stay engaged in the whole recovery process. It's like having a team in your corner, reminding you of your goals, helping you through the rough patches.
Yeah, it becomes about more than just willpower,
Yeah,
It's like you're harnessing the power of the whole family to make a real change.
exactly. And the article, it pointed out something really interesting. It's not just about being there to cheerlead. Families that go through therapy, they develop this much deeper understanding of addiction itself. They're better at spotting those warning signs, understanding what might trigger someone, and then they can actually help their loved one use healthier coping mechanisms.
So it's almost like they're all learning this new language together, a way to really communicate and support each other through the whole recovery journey.
That's a great way to put it. It's about moving away from just reacting to stuff and becoming more proactive. And that actually ties into another big plus the article mentioned, being more aware of potential relapses. And I don't mean like tattling on each other, but more like being able to pick up on those subtle changes, behavior, mood, that kind of thing. That might be a sign that someone's struggling.
So family therapy, it kind of gives loved ones the tools to recognize those warning signs early on and then step in with support before a full-blown relapse happens.
Exactly. It's about giving families the knowledge to be that source of stability, that support system when someone's feeling vulnerable. And maybe the most powerful thing about family therapy, at least in my book, is this idea of what they call generational healing. Have you ever heard of that?
I have, yeah. But I'd love to hear your take on it, especially when it comes to addiction and family therapy.
Sure. So the idea is that sometimes those unhealthy patterns we have, the ways we cope, even addiction itself, it can be passed down through generations, almost like, I don't know, some inheritance nobody wants, right? So family therapy, it tries to break those cycles. It's not just about treating the addiction that one person's dealing with, but maybe even freeing the whole family from these unhealthy patterns that might have been going on for who knows how long.
Wow, that's powerful. It's like hitting the reset button on, like, generations of struggle. But reading all of this, it got me thinking, does this approach always work? Is it right for every single family out there? Because the article did mention some potential downsides.
You're hitting on a really important point. The article was very clear about this. Not everybody's in the right place mentally or emotionally for family therapy, especially if they're actively struggling with addiction. It takes a certain level of, I don't know how to put it, maybe emotional readiness, being willing to face some tough emotions, some difficult family dynamics.
Usually going into this kind of therapy, it takes a certain level of vulnerability, a kind of strength even.
Absolutely. Family therapy, it often involves revisiting old hurts, talking about communication patterns that aren't working, and sometimes you have to confront some hard truths about how the family operates. It requires emotional energy, resilience, things that someone who's in the thick of addiction might not have in them at that moment. It's not about pushing people before they're ready.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, forcing someone into family therapy before they're ready emotionally, it could do more harm than good, right?
hmm
And the article talked about safe, how important it is for families to feel safe, supported in that therapeutic setting, so they can really open up and engage.
100%. And a good family therapist, that's what they're trained to do, create that safe space. An environment of trust, respect, no judgment, where everyone feels like they can share their piece without feeling ashamed or blamed. But the thing that really stood out to me was that even if, for whatever reason, the whole family's not up for therapy, it doesn't mean there's no hope.
So even if you've got family members who are hesitant or just plain against therapy, there are still ways to bring in those family-oriented ideas and support into the recovery process.
You got it. The article made it clear that even in individual therapy, you can still weave in those family-oriented principles and support. It's all about recognizing that addiction, it doesn't exist in a bubble, right? It affects that whole family system. So even when a therapist is working one-on-one with someone, they can teach them better ways to communicate, how to cope in healthy ways, how to set boundaries, things that ultimately benefit the entire family.
So it really seems like family therapy is this unique and valuable tool when you're tackling addiction treatment. And it's not just about, the person recovering, it's about the whole family healing, getting
hmm
stronger as a unit. But like we've been saying, it's not a cure-all, right? And it's definitely not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Finding that right approach, whether it's family therapy or individual therapy with that family focus, it all comes down to the specific needs and what's going on in that family. But there's this one last thing I wanted to bring up, something from the article that really got me thinking. It talked about how families can sometimes actually play a part in how addiction develops in the first place, not just in the recovery.
That's really interesting. We've been focusing on how powerful family can be in supporting recovery, but it makes you wonder, right? Could those same dynamics actually be contributing to substance use from the get-go? What do
Yeah.
you think?
It's complicated, for sure. But the article, it pointed out some really subtle ways that family dynamics, even unintentionally, can create this environment where addiction is more likely to take hold. Like, let's say a family has a history of trauma, mental health struggles, even just like unhealthy ways of communicating. All of that can actually make addiction more likely.
So it's not about pointing fingers at families, but more like recognizing how those underlying things, those dynamics, can sometimes increase the risk, right? Like they create this vulnerability that addiction can then latch onto.
Exactly. And here's the flip side. The article also suggested that families can be just as powerful in preventing addiction. How? By being open and talking about things, teaching healthy coping skills, building those strong connections and that sense of support.
It really shows you how important early intervention is, right?
Hmm.
Like creating a family environment where those healthy coping mechanisms are just second nature. You're building resilience, giving young people the tools to deal with life's curveballs without having to rely on drugs or alcohol.
Absolutely. And it's never too early to start having those conversations. Mental health, addiction, healthy ways to handle stress, it all needs to be out in the open. When you normalize those topics, you create a space where kids, teenagers, they feel like they can actually reach out for help if they need it.
That's a really powerful message to end on. We've covered so much in this deep dive, the ins and outs of family therapy, the benefits, the challenges, and how family dynamics can play a part in addiction, both in how it develops and how we prevent it. So for our listeners out there, what would you say are the key takeaways?
For me, it boils down to this. Addiction, it's never just one person's battle. It affects the entire family. And healing, it often means shifting that whole family system. Now, family therapy might not be the right answer for everyone, but understanding those dynamics, creating that supportive, loving environment, that's essential for recovery and for prevention.
I love that. This has been such an eye-opening conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. And to everyone listening, we hope this deep dive gave you a fresh perspective on family therapy for addiction and maybe even inspired you to learn more. Thanks for joining us on this journey, and until next time, stay curious.